You know, we always hear about evolution as survival of the fittest, right? The idea that the best trait just wins. But what if the journey itself is just as important as the destination? Today, we're going to dive into a pretty radical idea that the path something takes can actually matter more than its own strengths. And it's a principle that seems to shape, well, just about everything.
So let me ask you this. What could possibly connect a butterfly, your brain, and a single bacterium? I mean, at first glance, they have absolutely nothing to do with each other. But a fascinating new theory suggests they are all secretly governed by the very same hidden rule.
All right, let's start with puzzle number one. Picture a butterfly population that's been almost completely wiped out. You'd think their genetic diversity is just toast. But what researchers have found is that creating simple pathways, these little corridors of habitat connecting isolated spots, can have this huge, almost magical effect, bringing that diversity roaring back. So why is one simple connection so ridiculously powerful?
Okay, for puzzle number two, let's look inside ourselves. Our brains don't just grow in a straight line. Instead, they go through these really specific turning points, these brief, critical windows where everything gets reorganized. And during these moments, even tiny little influences can have massive, lifelong consequences for how we think and learn. Why are these specific windows so incredibly important?
And for our last puzzle, we're going microbial. Imagine a network of bacterial colonies. A really great mutation pops up, something helpful, like antibiotic resistance. Logically, you'd think it would just take over, but it doesn't always. Whether it succeeds or completely fails depends entirely on where in the network it started. The same mutation that thrives in one spot will vanish if it starts in another. So what gives? Why does its starting address totally beat out its genetic superpowers? Okay, we've got these three totally different puzzles, spanning from huge ecosystems all the way down to our own minds. The secret that ties them all together is a powerful concept, and it's called the needle eye. The theory calls these critical points bottlenecks, and the best way to think about it is, well, literally like the neck of a bottle. It's any kind of constrained channel, that narrow path for the butterfly, that brief window for the brain, or that central intersection for the bacteria. It's any point where flow gets restricted and everything has to squeeze through.
But here's the real kicker, the big idea. It's not just that these bottlenecks exist. The real secret is in the topology, the fundamental shape of the journey through the bottleneck. It's not just about squeezing through that tiny opening. It's about the exact specific twists and turns of the path you take to get there. That path is what dictates the outcome.
And this is a huge shift in how we look at things, right? The classic view of evolution is all about the what. What's the best gene? Who's the strongest? Who's the fittest? But this needle eye view asks a totally different question. It asks how. It focuses on the pathways themselves and asks which routes are even possible to take in the first place. Okay, so if the shape of the journey is the secret sauce, how in the world do you actually measure that? How can you see the signature it leaves behind? Well, the theory says that every time something passes through a bottleneck, it creates what's called a transition fingerprint. Now, this isn't a literal fingerprint, of course. It's a measurable mathematical signature of the path's shape. You can think of it like, when water flows through a narrow pipe, it creates all these unique swirls and patterns. The flow leaves behind a trace of its journey. That's the fingerprint. And the way they do this is actually super straightforward. It's just 3 steps. Step 1, you find that bottleneck, that pinch point. Step 2, you trace the journey. You actually record the data of how something moves through it. And then step 3, you read the signature. You analyze the shape of that data for its unique patterns. All right, so now that we have this new tool, this new way of seeing things, let's go back and crack those puzzles from the beginning. What this needle eye lens reveals is incredible. In every single one of those cases, the butterflies, our brains, the bacteria, the same exact principle is at work. The specific geometry, the shape of the path through that bottleneck, is what's stacking the deck. It's not random. The path itself is tilting the scales. And the cool thing is, this idea pops up everywhere. In ecosystems, the bottleneck is that habitat corridor, and it shapes genetic diversity. In our brains, it's those developmental turning points shaping our cognitive abilities. It even applies to artificial intelligence, where the initial design is a bottleneck that shapes how well it learns. And in our social networks, key people act as hubs that determine how ideas or strategies spread. It's this amazing unifying pattern. All right, To really see this in action, let's go back to our bacteria friends. Imagine their little world is shaped like a star. There's a central hub, and it's connected to a bunch of outer habitats. Let's call them leaves. Now, a great new mutation shows up. The only way for it to get to all the other leaves is by passing through that central hub. That's our classic bottleneck. Now check this out. This is where it gets really good. Experiments show that if that mutation starts out on the edge, in one of the leaf colonies, its chance of taking over is super low. It has to struggle just to get to the center. But if that same exact mutation happens to start right in the central hub, its chance of success goes through the roof. Why? Because from the hub, it has a direct path to everywhere else. It starts out at the distribution center. So the bottleneck doesn't just restrict the path, it massively amplifies the power of whatever starts inside it. The path literally determines the outcome.
Okay, so this is a really cool, powerful new way to see the world for sure. But so what? Why does this actually matter in the real world? What can we do with it?
Well, the theory's author, Ido Margolin, sums it up just perfectly. He says it challenges us to move from asking only what evolves to asking how it passes. In other words, it's telling us to study the journey itself, not just the winner at the finish line.
And when you start thinking about it, the real-world applications are just massive. If we understand these bottlenecks, we could design way more effective wildlife corridors for conservation. We could build smarter AI by shaping their learning paths from the very beginning. It could give us a much deeper understanding of those critical windows in brain development, and even help us predict how ideas, cooperation, or even diseases will spread through our social networks.
And all of this leaves us with one last kind of mind-bending question. Once you start looking for these needle eyes, you really do start to see them everywhere. So what are the invisible bottlenecks shaping your life? What are the constrained paths that are right now channeling the development of our technology, our societies, and maybe even our entire future? The shape of the path might just be the most important story there is.